Grown-ups, I have a message for you today, too. I'm sitting on a swing, which maybe is not the most perceived grown-up place to sit, but, we record on Thursdays, and obviously a lot in this world has changed between Thursday when we recorded and today on Saturday as I'm doing the compiling and getting ready to upload it. In the time that we have recorded and today, the president has contracted COVID and is now at Walter Reed. And I do take a moment during this sermon today to mention the calling out of white supremacy. That is something that's important. And so ordinarily, when we would have a circumstance like this, I could rework my sermon, and I can't do that this weekend. So I'm adding a little addendum here at the beginning of the sermon before we go into it. And this is what I would say, is that when pastors, when clergy, when any of us, elders, deacons, take our ordination vows, those are things that guide our judgment, hopefully. And so as someone who has promised you certain things, I will still promise that I believe calling out white supremacy, calling out any type of attitude that preferences one group of people over another is wrong. However, so is gloating about the sickness of an individual who is leading an entire country, whether we agree with that individual politically or not. And so I do want to make a point, as I would have in the prayers of the people, to pray for the president and the first lady and all of those who are currently affected by COVID. But also want to make clear that I believe that my point still stands on the sermon that you're going to see here shortly. And so that is the tension that we live as Christians, right? We don't get to glibly celebrate things and wish evil on others. But on the other side, we can't just blithely ignore the brokenness of this world. We have to respond, and we have to acknowledge brokenness and sinfulness when it exists. And so with that in mind, I invite you to listen to the sermon, but I don't think I would have felt comfortable this week without at least adding this amendment here before we begin. So anyway, I hope the sermon is meaningful, and I hope it brings you life. Yep. So before I go anywhere, I want to share this with you. So I try to call my mom on a pretty regular basis, and so this week I call her, and we're about 10 minutes into the conversation. And my mom says, "Oh, by the way, I need you to change the story that you told last week." And I started laughing because I thought, I think it's really cool that my mom is watching me from Youngstown, Ohio. And I said, I don't know if you are, but I was glad that you were. And I said, okay, so tell me where I got the story wrong. And if you watched last week, I talked about how we were talking about people complaining. I told a story that I remembered from when I was young. And I had made this argument that I told y'all that I thought my mom had thrown pieces of a waterbed down on the ground because they didn't fit right. I was wrong. My mom said the reason why she threw those, and she didn't throw them, so let me just get the story right, or she's going to call me and she'll call me at about 11 o'clock on Sunday and tell me how I once again got this wrong. She ordered a waterbed and expected it to be lacquered and varnished. It was only lacquered and varnished on half of it, which who the heck would buy a half varnished and lacquered waterbed? And so my mom said to kind of the floor person that she wanted it done right. And they said, well, no, we're not going to do that. And so my mom said, then I'm not going to buy it. And so was beginning to gently pull out the waterbed pieces. And then finally the owner of the sleep shop said, oh, yeah, this makes sense. Let me help you with these. So my whole perception of this story was completely wrong, right? It in a 7-year-old's mind, or, now I don't even know. Was I 35? Maybe. I don't know. Probably 7. But, as a young child, my perception of things was a little different. And that's life, right? We This is part of storytelling. This is telephone, right? This is all the games that we play where I might tell somebody something and then somebody else will tell somebody something. And before you know it, what started as Jim played his guitar became Doug went to a dance. And I don't know how that happens, but that's our stories sort of struggle over time. And it's interesting because I think that's kind of the way life is in general. Our perceptions start one way. The stories we tell start one way, and then we tell them again. And we might tell them another time, and they change a little bit. The narrative that we feed ourselves starts to come in play, right? So somebody does something to us that might have been completely benign. We accidentally cut somebody off in traffic, and depending on how that person feels about the day or themselves or how they were treated growing up or an accident they may have had when somebody else cut them off, there's a whole range of ways that that person may feel. And so where I may accidentally be cut off and I might not think another thing of it, the person next to me might be fit to be tied. And so our understanding of the world so often gets shaped by what we understand. And so it affects the way that we think about the people around us. I think Paul here in this Philippian passage is trying to make this argument as well. Paul, if there was anybody who you could argue was like par excellence, we've talked about this before. This is where Paul makes this argument to the church in Philippi. Listen, I, Paul, am about as legitimate as it comes. My story is complete. It's well organized. It's well put together. Listen, I am from the tribe of Benjamin. I trained really well. I not only was somebody who practiced as a Pharisee really well, I knew the law, but I also persecuted new Christians when I was Saul. My story was very specific. But then somehow that changes. Somehow there's something different in that story. He's no longer this person. In fact, he considers the story that he knows of his whole life to be trash, to be meaningless, to be nothing in compared to the story that he now knows in his life in Jesus Christ. His whole life changes. He's a completely different person. His world's turned upside down, and the story that he was able to tell about himself and about the world around him is not the same. I think that's fascinating. What Jesus Christ can do to somebody like Paul. That the life that Paul envisions in Jesus Christ is so significant that it takes somebody who is the superstar and shows that what they are and what they've been is not nearly what they thought. And that idea, that way of being is worth giving up everything for. Is worth everything being tossed away. You remember when in that passage there, Paul starts to talk about, I want to know Christ and his resurrection and the power, not that I've already attained this, but that somehow I'll understand the resurrection to the dead. Most scholars think that's an early hymn, that was something that people spoke to each other. It was like a creedal statement. That somehow the story of who Jesus Christ was, including his death and his resurrection, turned everything else meaningless. It was the proverbial, your mom correcting the story that you told the week before. I wonder what that means for each of us. I wonder what that means for a church that's undergoing a new transition. I wonder what that means for all of us. Again, I jokingly referred to the debates earlier in the service, but I'm fairly certain, and I don't want to speak for every single person who might be watching, But at least the straw polls I've taken over the last few days would be that there's literally not one person who went back and said, that's really what I like to see in people who are running for president of the United States. This is really the story I want to tell my family. It grieves me sometimes when I think that this is the election that my children have their first conscience of, that this is the story that's being told. There's something better, though. There's a world that Jesus Christ offered that Paul thought was so significant that he was willing to say that everything else up to that point was absolutely meaningless, and there was something to press towards. And I wonder what it would be like for each of us to really believe that the story of Jesus Christ was that significant. Would it be something worth fighting for? Would it be something worth giving up everything else for? Not giving in to a placid resignation to say, well, this is just the way the world is. I guess this is just the way politics is. A sad cynicism that just maintains the narratives and stories as they are today. No, I don't want to believe that. I don't know if you do either. Story that says, well, this is just another transition on top of any other. I guess we'll get into our boxes and we'll hunker down and we'll make it do for however many months and years we have to, and then we'll be on the other side, and then maybe we'll start again. That's a story we could tell ourselves, but I think Jesus Christ offers us much more. That maybe there's something better than bickering on national news, that maybe there's something better than the President of the United States not being able to deny white supremacy. That there might be something better than everything, the stories that we're told today. And if that's true, and if Paul's right, then it's worth continuing to show up for. It is worth pressing on towards a goal. It's worth being more than what we were now. Friends, I know that we are departing in an unusual time, right? I still think that the storyline that we've told for the last couple of years is good and meaningful and special. That good things have happened. That we can be very proud of what we've done, but perhaps all of it is meaningless to what Jesus Christ continues to offer. And it may be in this moment when our stories have to change, when the identifiers of who we are have to be renewed. It may be this moment that we can say, I too want to know the power of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I'm going to press on. So what does that mean? Well, I think it means showing up. And not just in physical form. I think it means showing up in our hearts, in our spirits. It means walking forward, not, again, like I talked about last week, giving into scarcity. Trusting in God's abundance, in this whole abundance that completely shaped somebody's life and shaped multiple people's lives. I think that's worth showing up for. It might be a willingness to hear the stories that we tell each other over and over again about who we are a little differently. It might be worth hearing the stories from our friends and family to say, I don't quite think that that's exactly how it happened. It's hearing trusted people tell you, you kind of made me sound like I was a crazy person, as almost a verbatim quote from my mom on the phone this week. It might be hearing the hard truths that our stories need to change a little bit. But press on. Press on to what Jesus Christ is offering. And when it gets hard, take heart in the psalm that we heard today, that God does restore the vine. God promises that abundance. Friends, we are who we are, and we can be proud of who we are. But there's so much more. So let's press on. Thanks be to God.